Okay. Hello, Helge. Hello, Erik. Do you hear me all right?
Can hear you well.
Perfect.
I hear you, Luca.
Yeah, I think the countdown was ended a little bit early. It's almost 1 p.m. So what I reckon we'll do is we'll just give it a few minutes, make sure everyone can join. And seeing that this is the first time that we host our webinars on LinkedIn Live and also YouTube Live, I just want to make sure that the audio is coming through. So if any of the attendees could just give me a thumbs up in the LinkedIn chat that you can hear us, then we'll be on our way in just a moment.
It's the best way to make people nervous is to put like the 5-minute counter.
It's a long
Yeah,
5 minutes.
5 minute of
Yeah.
silence.
Alone backstage.
Exactly. Oh, I see some thumbs up coming. There's a bit of a delay, I guess, between the live stream and it coming through. So if you do ask questions as well throughout, I'm not ignoring you. I will get onto them. I think there's about a 30-second delay between us. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. But most of all, thank you, Erik, for joining Helge and I today.
Thank you.
We'll be uncovering some AI and automation trends and topics and staffing, with a special emphasis on looking at Dedicare and what you guys are doing. I will be acting a bit of a sort of moderator. Hopefully, I have a few interesting points to say as well. Let's see. I'll let you be the judge. But otherwise, most of the juice will come from Erik and Helge. So without further ado, let me head into the presentation where we'll spend most of our time today. Perfect. And like any webinar, let's start off with an agenda and also maybe a quick introduction of the two gentlemen that I have with me. We're joined by, as already mentioned, Erik. Erik is a solution analyst for the IT department at Dedicare. We're also joined by our supreme leader, my supreme leader, Helge, CEO of Globus. And we actually have the trio of the Scandinavian countries. We're missing Finland. So any Finnish listeners, perhaps you can join the next one. We have Helge, who's Norwegian, based out of Mauritius right now. Erik, who's Swedish, based out of Sweden, unless you've changed since we last spoke.
Well, I'm based out of Åland, which is
Hold on.
part of Finland. So
Okay,
we
so
have
we
it pretty
have
much covered.
we have it. Great. And then we have me, the Dane, based out of Denmark. And as I like to say, Denmark, the capital of Scandinavia. I can imagine that probably creates some heated discussions, but we'll leave that for another time. But the agenda today is, this quick introduction. We're going to be covering automation and how Dedicare have done it. We'll look at adoption and implementation of AI projects, but also automation and tech projects as a whole. A favorite topic of mine is kind of the future vision of Dedicare, but also underneath this topic, talk about some of the industry trends that we're seeing in staffing, but also in AI, and some hopefully good predictions and probably some bad ones as well about what will happen with the market. And then we'll do a bit of a closing remarks and Q&A. And the Q&A, please ask questions, but we'll probably only revert back to them at the end. So it's not because I'm ignoring you. We'll make sure we address them at some point. Great. Well, let's head into our first slide here, that is automating Dedicare. So Erik, I'll throw it over to you in just a moment, but Dedicare is, at least from our perspective, one of the earliest adopters of AI in staffing. I know that we, for one, we've been working with you guys since 2019. And I think, Erik, you were a part of that almost since the very beginning. I'd love to hear kind of, from our conversations, you've been talking about Dedicare being a sort of a SaaS first strategy, but what is that? What is it that allows Dedicare to be these first movers within AI and SaaS products and stay so innovative?
No, I think it comes down to kind of our philosophy. We decided to be a SaaS first kind of company instead of developing things on our own. But we do have a leadership that is very open to technology and new technology. And this comes from the top down. I mean, our board of directors are very focused on, what are we doing in relationship with AI and automation, each of our departments. So the willingness to kind of incorporate this kind of technology into our everyday lives is a very important factor in kind of automating Dedicare. And like you said, we've been with working together with you guys since the early days. Mattis, our CIO, when he was approached by, I don't know if it was you, Helge, or Jan, with this idea of Globus and teaming together with Innovation Norway, it was kind of a no-brainer for him. So it's that willingness to explore what's coming instead of kind of sitting on the sidelines and waiting for it. We want to be ahead of the game.
Great. And Helge, what was it like from your impression, kind of, starting off conversations with Dedicare back in 2019? Obviously AI and automation was a very different thing back then, and probably also phrased very differently. Was that also your impression?
It was brand new, and we met with Dedicare and an open mind from their end. But I know you were quite strict as well, Erik, on kind of your due diligence process and vetting your vendors, because in the later stages we were invited to Stockholm to present to the board, all the managers. So for me and Jan, it was like the most important exam we've ever had. And we came out of that like, yes, we did it. We convinced them. We're moving forward. So yeah, that was an exciting period for sure.
That's definitely one of those things that, being kind of SaaS first, it's very important for us to make sure that who we partner with have a solid foundation and really do their job, since we don't have as much of control as if we had developed something ourselves.
Good to hear. And what I like to do on the next slide here, which is very much still tied to kind of automating and also maybe the experience that you've had with Dedicare and the AI implementations, but it's talking about actually personally our first exposure to AI and how that can vary. So maybe Erik, if you could answer, what was your sort of first use case with AI on a personal level, and then also flip it into when and how that was then applied on a professional level, in this case with Dedicare.
Sure. I mean, AI in itself isn't new, so to speak, but I think that it's been lifted to the forefront with this kind of generative AI, ChatGPT. Everybody knows about that. So that's kind of on a personal note. That's where it kind of started consciously for me when that launched, playing around with that. For me, there's a big overlap between personal and professional use, but it's a lot summarize information. I may throw a question into ChatGPT instead of going to Google right away, see what kind of answers I get. On top of that, I have a kind of a hobby of photography, and there's a lot of AI tools that have surfaced lately for editing, specifically in Photoshop, kind of that generative fill functionality or other software to help with the editing process, kind of cutting down the time that it takes to go through a whole bunch of pictures. And then obviously on a professional side, we saw that there's a ton of different uses of AI in the workplace, especially when ChatGPT came. We did, our research, our homework. Where can we use this? Internally, we have, workshops. One of my colleagues on the IT department runs workshops with all the business units. How can you use ChatGPT? And kind of the areas that we're using it today is, writing job descriptions or job ads for candidate campaigns. Obviously, together with Globus, with the recommending of candidates to match based off of different criteria. We are a Nordic country, but we have business in the UK. We bought a company there not too long ago. So there's some translation of documents and writing some business policies. Obviously, there's some tweaking that happens after we get it out, but it's a good way to kind of cut down on the time that you spend doing that monotonous must-do work. So we can focus on the more value adding.
There's a definite trend, I feel, especially for professional use cases, in AI being applied a lot in administrative and monotonous tasks, allowing sort of you to be able to focus on some more sort of value driven activities. Helge, I mean, you're prior to joining, well, you're still a data scientist by heart, really, but I mean, you've really been exposed to the term AI, before it probably was even coined AI, for much longer than Erik and I, and curious to kind of hear, what was your first exposure to it, and what was your first sort of personal use case in applying it?
The first exposure, but I think this was back in 2012. It was like before the term data science was coined, like you said. I was working in Equinor at that time. I was working with large analysis and spreadsheets and these kind of things, and programming up algorithms. And I found it was very tedious because you had to write a lot of rules. And then got into machine learning. I was just amazed how you could create a training data set, and then the machine would learn all these rules by itself. Like, that just blew my mind. And from that day, I've kind of been working with that in a lot of different fields. So and back then, I don't think there was too many like personal use cases. That has come in the later years, especially after GPT was launched. It's really just been a boom. And I was the one putting in homework with the kids, because I see now with it's like having your own personal tutor. You're sitting next to the kid and you can't answer everything, but you have ChatGPT there. And especially with the hands-free feature, it talks back to you and can answer the kid. Just tell it, don't give the answer straight out, just help guide us.
Yeah.
So very useful.
I think the personal use cases with the recent news from OpenAI, will cover that on a later slide, but will actually also really exponentially increase the use cases for the average person. But let me move into the next slide, and that is, now we've touched upon our experience and our exposure to AI. But what about the biggest topic, I think, especially for staffing agencies, is implementing AI, and there's plethora of solutions out there who've now added AI to the domain, or all of a sudden there's an AI company, and it's just difficult to kind of like understand what is AI and what use cases does it actually have. Helge, you mentioned the due diligence process that you went through, in speaking with Dedicare. Maybe Erik, could you shed some more light on this due diligence process, or maybe even just the decision-making process in integrating AI and automation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a pretty substantial kind of due diligence process in the start of looking for solutions that we take with any potential partner. There's forms to fill out and stuff like that. But for us, it's always seeing the value. I mean, we try to identify what is the need here, what are we trying to solve, and then seeing what solutions match that. And if they have AI is important for us. Automation is important, but it obviously has to add some value. I mean, I've looked at plenty of solutions that claim that they have AI or automation, and then you look into it, and it doesn't really add any value. It's just a buzzword for that company. And for us, it's important for when we go through that due diligence process to understand that this company gets it. They see the value. They're working on it. Like I said, we're fortunate to have an interest throughout the organization to utilize AI and automation where we can. Obviously, we're kind of in the starting phase of it and seeing where it's going to take us.
Yeah. And Helge, maybe from the vendor's perspective, having worked with Dedicare and many other staffing agencies, what sort of advice would you give to a staffing agency looking to implement AI? What things should they be considering? Are there any factors that they should really be honing in on?
It's like Erik said. It doesn't really matter if it's AI or not. Like, the technology behind is not the important thing. It's the output. So the business value that you're getting, that's what you should really focus on, the business case, and make sure you're getting that. Either run trials or tests or whatever. Check with references. But yeah, I think that's the important factor.
Yeah, it's good to hear. Maybe kind of then, implementing AI is one thing, or implementing, a project is one thing, but how do you then define the success of something that is also vastly new, where there's not much potential data and reference cases on it. So that's what will lead us into the next slide. What is considered a successful AI project? So I'd love to hear again from you, Erik, here. What makes a project successful, or more specifically an AI automation project successful at Dedicare?
For us, it's a lot more than just the implementation. Obviously, it's to have it become a success, you need to have the buy-in, and that starts from the top down, from the leadership to those sitting working in it. You need to have a strong sponsor that's going to push the solution and the change. But it's not until you start seeing that kind of return of investment, not just the monetary, but the time it takes to implement a successful solution, where you start seeing the value coming back to us. Maybe we're quicker, we're freeing up more time for our consultant managers. That's when you can really say that something's been successful in our eyes. It's easy to say, oh, it's a success, we implemented the project, and then move on to the next one.
Yeah.
But I think you're not doing yourself any favors until you take that next step to see that, that this is actually working. It's helping those that it's supposed to help, and it's solved that business problem that we went into the project with.
And what about the staff of Dedicare? What's their response been to AI and automation tool? Because I know there is a bit of a stigma amongst recruiters, and some warranted and some perhaps not warranted, in that AI will replace recruiters, and that's at least a discussion that is brought up quite often.
I think it's a mix. It's like with everything. I mean, different personalities will have different responses to change, to new technology. Some people will be, all for it from the get-go. Some people take a little bit longer to work up to, accepting the change or the new technology. Generally speaking, I have to say that the Dedicare is very open to change.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're very interested. Absolutely. There is some skepticism, which I think is healthy. But the willingness to, tackle the new technology is there, which is great, and obviously it helps from our side when we try to bring a new solution to the company. So I'm fortunate to work with my coworkers at Dedicare when it comes to that.
Good. And speaking about specific projects at Dedicare, can you name a project where or like an area of Dedicare where you've managed to then apply AI or automation?
I think the most prominent one is probably our relationship with Globus, and I would probably bring that up even if we weren't in a webinar together.
Holding a gun underneath the table.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think one of our big success stories is Acapedia in Norway.
Yeah.
They're a business unit that work with staffing within the kindergarten market in Norway. They were very early on jumping onto Globus. For them, business moves very quickly, especially in the morning. They want to, fill vacancies that occur, first thing in the morning. They need somebody there in a very short amount of time. So the recommender that Globus brought to us, our ability to engage, candidates in a whole different way, is key. And we've seen tremendous growth for Acapedia. Obviously, it's hard to say that it's just because of a solution or whatnot, but there's no doubt in my mind that the AI technology in Globus absolutely helped that growth, which is great.
Yeah, and then shout out to Paul, who owns the account Acapedia, so I'm sure he's going to be happy to hear that as well. But Helge, I think you had a follow-up to the implementation comment as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Erik said. The business output you get, and how much more respect I've gotten over the years for the actual change management and implementation process. Because as a techie, you think we build it, it's awesome, they're going to use it, of course, makes total sense, and that doesn't necessarily happen in a B2B world. So, just making sure you take that into account as well when you plan the project, how you'll introduce it to your users, how you'll get the power users who can help you introduce it in the organization, how will you do support and keep up the momentum along the way? Will you roll it out to everyone at once, or will you create some good user stories with one team first to create engagement? All of this is also an important part of the projects to make it successful. So yeah,
Very
just
good
wanted to
point.
mention that.
Just to add to that, I mean, we are in the middle actually of doing an upgrade from Globus, the first version, to Globus Next in Sweden for 2 of our business units, and we've definitely seen that process and put a lot of energy into that. One of my colleagues, Karin, she's worked with that whole change management process and the making sure that the implementation goes right. So it's a lot of work. I'm glad she's taken on most of it, but it's definitely a challenge. It's more than just here you go.
It's interesting to see the spin-offs that has come of that as well. Now that Karin has kind of done that, we've also created the dashboard with analytics and started looking at more forecasting into the market to improve recruitment. Like, what talents do you need at what time, or what kind of campaigns should you be running? So I think that's also, it shows some of the benefits you can have with doing this that wasn't necessarily planned.
Yeah,
For
good
sure.
points all around. I want to, hop into sort of potentially my favorite topic, and that is always talking about, the future. Even though we should also talk about the present because the present is here, but still kind of looking ahead and seeing what's happening in the market, not only in the staffing industry and what Dedicare are looking at, but also just in AI as a whole, because a lot of that will be applied to staffing, maybe with a lag effect, and some of it not even with a lag effect. So I have a few exciting topics that I think we should get around to, and I think we have to start. We almost have to start, with the most recent AI news, and that OpenAI have, as of Monday, announced that they released a new model, GPT-4o, and the O apparently stands for Omni, which should be like all inclusive. It's supposed to be at least coined by a lot of media outlets who like to create traffic. That's their objective, I guess, as the Google killer. But that's one step at a time. But you already said, Erik, you use sometimes as Google, so that kind of worked quite nicely for them. But I think my initial impression with GPT-4o, and I think we can talk about the applications and staffing as well, but is that, first of all, it's from a user perspective, it's significantly faster. And what I've also noticed is that OpenAI, they've said that the average response time of it is 320 milliseconds and can get as low as 200 milliseconds, which is very similar and in some cases probably faster than what it takes a human to respond to in a conversation. So very interesting sort of momentum that we see in OpenAI. But I'd love to maybe kind of open the floor up for you guys as well. What your perception is with GPT-4o, and also for the audience, like what does that actually mean? Like, is that just a new model? Am I going to get a better, generative AI computer supporting me? But what does that actually mean for us? Maybe
Do you want to start, Erik?
yeah, Erik, if
Yeah.
your thought
No,
first.
I think there's obviously the evolution is very rapid. It's in AI, especially with ChatGPT. I mean, how many different versions have we seen since it was first announced? So it's moving very quickly. But I think this is kind of game changing. It's like you mentioned the Google killer. You're able to interact with it in a whole different way, and it is really like having that human on the side helping you, instead of having that a little bit of a lag. But now you're getting into being able to interact with this new model in all the different ways like you could with a human being, whether it be text, audio, image, video, whatever it is. So this, I think this is pretty revolutionary.
I fully agree. The mimicking of human emotions and whatnot, it's almost too real at times, and you kind of get this kind of feeling of a sequel to a Terminator movie 20 years later. Hopefully we don't go in that direction, but what about bringing it into staffing and applications where this new model, I mean, we already use GPT at Globus significantly, but what will this, what does GPT-4o open up in terms of new staffing applications? Helge, have you put any, well, I'm sure you have actually at this point, but, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, for one, I think OpenAI is doing a great job in demonstrating how the technology is working, both demonstrating and creating expectations in the consumer market, which will then trickle into the business market as well, of course. But just a few weeks ago, I was talking to another agency about the interview process, and the conclusion is that will never be taken over from humans. That will always be person to person, and then now OpenAI comes out with this model and shows how it can mimic emotions and understand all kind of complex speech patterns in a voice-to-voice setting, and is really rapid in the responses. So the changes are just really rapid. I would warn everyone listening just against letting your recruiters use it because you need to think of GDPR as well, being in Europe. So don't kind of push that out too soon. But for personal use cases, it's definitely great, and you'll see those capabilities coming into the professional applications as well. And we already started thinking about what this could mean in terms of add-ons, like talking to the applications, or even the demonstrations where they use video and that kind of input. So it opens entirely new dimensions, which is very interesting.
I think probably also a bit of almost a controversial topic within AI is the biasness of AI and the discussions around that. But actually, a big emphasis on GPT-4o is actually the opposite. They're really kind of trying to attack it head first and instead actually use it to identify potential biases, where a lot of emphasis will be on detecting languages. So imagine a staffing realm being able to detect languages that might inadvertently exclude certain demographics, or like flag gender specific language, and actually have this model suggest alternative language that could be potentially more neutral or inclusive. So they've also, at least they've made it very clear that they want to tackle the biased topic. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what direction they take that, and if this can also be applied as a use case in staffing.
I think one of the most immediate things that companies will notice is in applications which use the GPT models, like Globus. We use it for parsing. The users haven't noticed, but we're struggling a lot with the capacity. So we had to deal with a lot of stuff on the infrastructure part in order for GPT to function without the user kind of getting too much delay. So now with the model being faster, we're able to give that over to the user, so the responses will be faster and better. Being able to handle bigger attachments, like larger amount of text, we'll be able to have more memory. So just better results for the users, basically.
I think, we could just talk about GPT-4o and then call it a webinar, but for the sake of then, moving into other topics, and then there's definitely one more that I want to cover and get your input on, Erik, and that is the elephant in the room for a lot of staffing agencies in Sweden, and that is the healthcare market, which has been very difficult for everyone in Q1 especially. Maybe just for our listeners as well, Erik, could you explain what is actually happening in Swedish healthcare currently?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the market kind of Q1's been a little tough. We started seeing kind of at the end of last year. Sweden, for the first time, did a large, national framework agreement for all of the different regions here for healthcare services. And so it wasn't implemented all at once. There were regions were attaching themselves, one by one. So it caused a little bit of hesitation in waiting on that to be finalized before continuing to order. And then, as everybody knows, Sweden, it's a political topic. You're looking to reduce the reliance on staffing, and then so that is affecting us. But that's where AI and automation and everything comes into play. We're a bunch of companies, you're probably like 100 different staffing companies in Sweden fighting for the same order, pretty much the same candidate pool. So the process of, screening, of getting relevant assignments out at the relevant times, that's always key for us, to win the market. and that's where we're hoping to see the effects of specifically Globus when Next is rolled out for both our business units here.
Great point. As often, I think Helge, you mentioned how often innovation is stalled. Well, you mentioned it offline, at least to me, how innovation often can be stalled when there are cost savings and tough markets, but it's actually then you kind of really have to make sure that you kind of look at automating activities. And yeah, Helge, what is your thought? Like from a vendor, it's easy for us to say that, but like from a vendor's perspective, what would be your recommendation to agencies in Swedish healthcare?
Yeah, it's a tough nut because at the one hand you need to cut costs, and at the other hand, having the right technology and automation will also save you costs. So you might not have the means to invest in that. So, but given the option, I would definitely invest in technology that could give you those the cost savings, because that's the most long-term solution.
Yeah. Good. And I've just noticed the time as well. So, again, this is when you open up the nutcrack of GPT and it kind of just always goes off topic when Helge and I are in the room, at least. So I wanted to, kind of draw this a bit to a conclusion before I take some questions as well from the rest of you. As we move into the next slide, our final advice here is to dive into AI. But maybe, what does it look like actually, being a staffing agency and getting started in the market and getting up to speed? Helge, I know you had some thoughts on sort of the barrier to entry in the market right now. Could you shed some light on that as a sort of a closing remark?
Yeah, it's hard to predict where the market is going, but we see a lot more technology coming into play. So probably we'll see more self-service. In marketplaces, I still think there will be recruiters helping to facilitate the supply and demand on platforms, even though you have more self-service and automation. But today we know there's a low barrier to entry into the staffing market. You're one person, you can basically start a staffing agency and get some candidates and get some jobs, and there you go. Potentially in the future, you might be more relying on technology and data to get started. So that might increase the barrier to entry into the market, and we might see that ending up with more larger players, which is then more technology enabled. So at least that's a hypothesis, could be, especially when we see the Generation Z coming into play, which don't like to be called or talked to in person. They want to have an app and just choose their own assignments.
Yeah, very true. And Erik, what about from your perspective? What would sort of probably the most difficult question, but what would be sort of your one tip to give to staffing agencies who are considering automation and AI projects?
I think my one piece of advice is to jump on it and try it. I mean, if you have the ability to do it, then take a serious look at it and see where you can incorporate it. Be careful though. I mean, don't just dive head in, but with a little bit of caution. I mean, set up a strategy and kind of make sure that you have all the boxes checked, because there are various aspects, like you mentioned before, GDPR, etc., that you have to take into account, especially in Europe. But I think join now early on. Don't kind of sit on the sidelines. Things are happening very quickly. So I think now is the right time, and just dare. I mean, it's new technology. Everybody's a little bit leery, but there's definitely wins to be had.
So what I'm hearing is swan dive in, don't belly flop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Very graciously.
Yeah. That's difficult.
Yeah.
No, perfect remarks. Thank you, guys, and thank you everyone also for listening in, and thanks again, Erik, for joining. I'd love to. I know we've gone over time already, so I can understand people have a tight schedule. But if there are any questions, I'd love to take them. And I know already that we got a question as we were talking about biases, and I think that's when your question, Peter, came in about personal data. So let me just read it out for the audience. It's AI like ChatGPT has some issues regarding protection of personal data. We've seen examples of AI segregating based on people's origin. How to prevent that. And also he mentions here that, not that people also might segregate on that. Completely understand that. And that's a very valid point. And that's why actually I wanted to mention GPT-4, because they specify that they have this as one of their objectives to make sure that it doesn't include that many biases going forward. What we've done at Globus, at least, is we've removed gender, age from the equation, from our recommender, because we do not want that to influence or be considered in the AI matching. So you are right in that case, that there have been some cases where you can see that there have been biases, but hopefully, this is at least my prediction, it will actually be used to kind of combat that in the future. But time will tell. Helge, do you have any additional thoughts to that comment?
I think what we saw was that we had to split it up. So we're using AI for specific things like understanding skills, understanding roles, understanding locations, these kind of things. But then we also had to implement one more layer, which gives us the opportunity to tune the different variables as well, because it depends on the business you're in, and also avoids these kind of things or biases, so you can control that a bit more. And what we've seen so far is that AI actually helps recruiters being more objective, because it presents a lot of variables objectively, and that's what they take into consideration instead of maybe thinking about origin or name or gender, which is easier done if you don't have that objective kind of ground truth. And then we also have a human in the loop, which I think is important. Once you fully automate the process, that's when you get into a lot of like gray areas. Because if a person is turned down for a job by an AI, then you really, that's kind of a gray area.
So what I'm hearing is it's important to ensure that there's a recruiter in the loop, influencing that process.
Yes, I think so. At least, otherwise you need to cover the legal grounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about you, Erik? Do you have any 2 cents from your perspective on that comment as well?
Not too much to add, but I think it comes down to, at least from our side, that due diligence process, and with all the regulations that are coming with the new AI Act and stuff like that.
Yes.
To ensure that the companies that we partner with, follow that and takes things into account. Like you said, removing kind of that gender, age from your product is obviously helping us. Now we're seeing, just based off of hard facts, do they live the closest? Do they have the work experience? Do they match the role? Is that where they want to work? That's primary, and then everything else is secondary. So I think it's working with our partners that's important in questions like this.
I think another important point on that is, AI is good and all, but your data strategy is super important and can be a competitive advantage. So having data that's clean, enough data or data collection process, and then also utilizing that data, not just giving it away to someone, then making sure that you retain the ownership of your data. That's also a very important point. That's the fuel of AI. So without data, you don't get much AI.
There won't be any AI. It'll just be the A without the I.
Exactly.
But the directive that you mentioned, Erik, I think that's actually a good point, and maybe even though we've already passed the topic of implementation and choosing vendors, that's one I think important maybe factor to consider is make sure that they are aware of the new EU directive that is coming, and that they're actually looking to apply it. It's almost going to be kind of when GDPR came out a few years ago. It's going to be almost that same thing, but just in AI, and probably even more extreme in some areas. So I think it's very important that you pose those questions to your vendors that you're looking at. But I think, without further ado, we have a lot of people who are listening to the recording of this. So I don't want to, continue for forever. So I reckon what we do now is we wrap it up and we thank everyone for listening in, whether you tune in live or you're watching this in the future. Thank you very much. And most of all, Erik, thank you so much for taking the time and joining Helge and I. It was a joy also preparing with this. And yeah, hopefully I sparked, or we sparked some good, interesting topics. And feel free to reach out to any of us or connect with us on LinkedIn to continue the conversation.
Great job facilitating, Luca.
Oh, my
Thanks
pleasure.
for that.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Take care. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.